Hi, my name's Rich Harrington.
And I'm Ian Robinson.
And today we're taking a look at a new option. Well, it's not really new, but it's improved, LensBlur.
Yeah, LensBlur, it's just something that really can kind of take your projects from, hey, that's pretty cool, to, wow, that really looks kind of polished, and how did you do that?
And it's funny that we judge polished by the depth of field or shallow depth of field, but we're sort of going through a bokeh porn phase where people love shallow depth of field.
That's right.
And sometimes you can't pull it off. I mean, it certainly is a production value and a style of technique, but now we have better control that we can modify footage. And you brought up a good point when we were talking earlier. You could use this to actually make flat footage look a little more filmic.
Yeah, very much so. Especially, you know, as more and more directors and producers get out there and start shooting things with their DSLR cameras, they're really starting to get in tune with the whole idea of shallow depth of field and a soft focus, and the ability to actually fix it in post is not lost on them.
All right, so for flexibility here, I'm going to apply it to an adjustment layer, which is fine. And we can, of course, apply it right to the effect.
Sure.
And under blur, we have camera lens blur, which replaces the old, much slower lens blur effect.
That's right. You can't stress that enough. It's pretty snappy.
Yeah. And so one of the things here that's pretty big is the ability to change the actual shape of the iris, so you sort of get that property. Let's crank this up, and you'll start to see, you know, I also mentioned repeat edge pixels there, so you don't get that black border.
That's right.
And so here we're using a hexagon, and on these larger ones, you see there's actually hexagons there on some of those highlights.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we change this shape, logically, the octagon would go to an 8-sided sort of blur. So, you know, we've got these sort of floating things here, you know, the blur artifacts.
Yep.
And we can obviously keyframe this. So if we wanted to start very blurry and then maybe rack focus into play by maybe 2 seconds in, you know, we can do that sort of rack focus as it pulls in.
Yeah, no, and I mean, again, it's just adding that nice level of polish to your scene. It's going to give you a nice transition in, and again, with the control over the specific shape of the blur, you're getting to stylize that footage just that one little bit more.
Yeah, and what I like to also point out is it's not just the fact that it's doing this blur. I mean, part of it is that it's doing the blur faster, which alone is nice, but that it's much more natural than the normal sort of blurs you're used to. You've got the ability to sort of affect it. You can adjust the roundness of the blur, how much roughness at the edges. The big thing down here too is you can also go in and start to deal with specular highlights. So the bright areas could actually start to bloom, and if we go ahead and lower the threshold, you'll see that the brighter areas there are actually blooming. Let's just tone that back a bit. And you see there that we're getting highlights that sort of start to peak a little.
Yeah, and you preview this and you'll start to get kind of a twinkle effect. And it's really nice, and again, it's just another way to add that really nice polish to your shot.
Yeah, and since this is on an adjustment layer, we can actually blend that back, but it's very nice. So especially if you're working with computer-generated items and you want to do that, or flat video, like for example, in this next shot, you know, we wanted the shallow depth of field, but we were on a very long lens, and it was 2 in the afternoon.
Yeah, of course, you know, optimum time for shooting.
Right, exactly. Light was overhead, harsh shadows, long distance, long lens, not going to get depth of field.
Unless
you take a time.
That's right.
So we exported a frame and went to Photoshop and just sort of painted our depth mat here. So we're seeing that white is going to be blurry. Black is in focus, and then what's these lighter areas here? Why are these here?
Well, it's going to give you that nice gradual transition from one to the other. So if it's 100% white, it's going to be really blurry, and if it's 100% dark, it's going to be sharp. So it's giving you the mid-range.
And we could even paint in Photoshop where like some of these objects that were taller up if we want them to fall off. So we've got that layer, and we say, let's go ahead and apply the lens blur. And the big option here is, what's your depth mat? So now, as we start to crank that blur up, you'll see that the different areas fall off. And if it's going the wrong direction, what would you choose?
Invert.
Exactly. Which I can't tell you how many times I get it wrong, and I go, oh, that's backwards. Well, it's easy. You can just click the invert map, and it will flip to the other way.
That's right.
But now, you know, we'll tone that back a little bit. That's a bit high. but we sort of have that tilt shift look where our foreground is in focus and the background falls out of focus.
Yeah, no, and that's really kind of a hot look today, so something you might want to check out. But one of the things I kind of want to stress, and Rich just, it's so ingrained in how we work, but Rich sort of jumped into it. We painted the depth matte in Photoshop, and again, this is just another way that you can actually utilize the entire Creative Suite
Yes.
to actually achieve the effect. So even though this is a new effect within After Effects, we're still utilizing the power of Photoshop by being able to use the brushes and quickly jumping over there.
Because people forget how easy it is to jump back and forth. Command-D, and you'll go right from After Effects to Photoshop if you've got a graphic file.
Yeah.
Well, that's easy. Paint it, touch it up. Why? Well, in this case, this is a 10-second long layer.
Yeah.
I know people say, oh, I'll just take the footage layer and I'll apply this effect, and then I'll do a curve, and then I'll desaturate, and then I'll do levels. And it's like, dude, you've just applied 4 effects, and you got to render it. Or you could make a still image.
One still image, load it once, After Effects looks at it once, and then you can apply it using your filter.
Of course, this LensBlur, which is an effect, is also now in our real cameras, right?
Yeah.
So if we jump over to a scene here, we've taken a photo, we've wrapped it into a cylinder, we've dropped it in, we got our 3D camera, but we don't really have a realistic relationship between the foreground and the background.
Yeah, no, it just sort of looks like somebody's standing right there next to the mountains.
Yeah, like this is the wallpaper at the REI store.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we go into the camera here, we can actually take advantage of the camera settings, and what we want to turn on is the Enable Depth of Field option.
Why would you want to do that?
Oh, I don't know, because I want longer render times. So when you do that, don't mind these little lines here. These will go away as we start to work on depth of field. But if we twirl down our options here, you're going to see that we actually have the ability to access those same controls you just saw, right?
Yep.
So we got the blur shape, the aperture controls, the iris amounts. So you can actually adjust, what areas bloom if you wanted to. As you lower that down, you're going to start to see blooming in some of the highlights. A lot of flexibility. The big thing here, though, is that you actually have those same camera lens blur options translated to the 3D camera as well.
Yeah, most definitely. So rather than having to always apply it just to the footage, you can apply it to the camera that you're using through the entire scene.
Yeah, so if you've got flying text that's going to move from far away in, or you're dealing with a multi-plane type animation, you can have that more natural fall off. And of course we had depth of field blurring before, but now you've got so many more controls that you just didn't have before with advanced options for the camera.
Yeah, most definitely. And like we said before, instead of having to apply it to each individual layer, you can actually just adjust it right there within the camera.
Which is better control and, of course, less render time when you're dealing with one camera as opposed to a bunch of layers of effects. So be sure to check out the book, Motion Graphics with Adobe Creative Suite 5 Studio Techniques. Cover lots of cool things about using After Effects with the rest of the Creative Suite. Yeah. And anything else that stands out for you from the book that you really liked?
Well, honestly, since we're talking about the bokeh and the LensBlur and all that sort of stuff, I really loved the chapter that you spent on actually shooting with your camera to create animated backgrounds.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes, rather than having to recreate absolutely everything in post, it's a heck of a lot faster if you just break out your camera with your lights and use some interesting creative techniques. And I just really, really love that chapter.
Cool. Well, we actually do some real shooting in the book, and then we use Premiere Pro and Bridge to organize the footage, then hand it off to After Effects and work with it. And that's just one workflow. As a motion graphic artist, a modern motion graphic artist, your tool set's got to be bigger than just After Effects. You work at a major broadcaster. You spend a lot of time in After Effects. How about the rest of the apps? What do you do?
Honestly, the rest of the apps, I spend a ton of time in Photoshop doing my storyboarding, and Illustrator creating individual elements, or actually using the Bezier paths to control the cameras a little bit more. There are a bunch of different, apps that I spend a lot of time in addition to After Effects. Now, yes, I love After Effects, and I'll be the first person to champion After Effects as the primary tool, but I want to stress those words, primary tools, because honestly, it takes the entire Creative Suite to actually really reach your full potential.
Yeah, so think of After Effects as the center of your universe, but you've got all these other cool things swirling around in the Adobe universe that are going to make it that much better.
Yeah, and honestly, just to jump in one last thing, if you utilize all these extra tools, it'll actually make your workflow faster. I can jump into Photoshop and create elements a heck of a lot faster than I can actually stay natively within After Effects and use some of those other tools.
And if you need vector tools, you got far more control over in Illustrator than you would in After Effects. So just really utilize the right tool for the right job.